Karyn Dolan was born and raised in the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York. She has had a keen interest in folklore and ghost stories since childhood and has been engaged in in-depth studies of ancient and pre-Christian religions for years. Karyn is the host of Through the Keyhole, a weekly internet radio program which can be heard on the Paranormal Radio Network every Friday. While her show is primarily devoted to ufology and the paranormal, cryptozoology, hidden history, and other fringe topics are regularly discussed on the show as well. Karyn also provides copy editing and transcription services for various writers and researchers in the UFO paranormal field, including her husband Richard Dolan, author of UFOs in the National Security State. Karyn, and for that matter Richard, live with their two extremely precocious and very bright homeschooled children in Rochester, New York, not that far from where I live. The subject of her extremely important talk for us here this morning is UFOs and media desensitization of children. Please join me in welcoming this fellow New Yorker back to Roswell, Karyn Dolan.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Peter, for such a nice introduction. I love being back in Roswell again. It's a great place, wonderful town. Everybody is so fantastic here. It's a lot of fun being here. I see we have a few people turn out for Saturday morning cartoons. This is always fun. UFO images, UFOs themselves, may seem strange to us, but they don't seem that strange to our children anymore. They actually have seen the images for years. They've seen them everywhere. They're seeing them in advertisements. They're seeing them in cartoons, movies, comic strips. In our house, they see them on the bookshelves. They see them every place. What most of us don't realize, and I actually came to realize this only recently, is that every time we sit down to watch TV or watch a movie, we're actually participating in a CIA mind control program. These are some images that are very familiar to our children. And I want to just mention that I ran this by my kids. After I put this together, I showed this to my daughter, who's 9. And I said, you know about all these, right? You've seen all of these. And she said, oh, yeah, I know who they are. And I said, well, do they look like aliens? And she's like, yeah. And they kind of do. You know, when you look at all of these, there's something that they all have in common. And I'm thinking mostly it's the eyes, those big black eyes, which also have appeared in art on rocks for thousands of years all over the world. There are some drawings from Australia from 3000 BC. And these are showing the Wagina, which are supposed to be magical people who came from the sky. These give me the creeps just looking at them. And they're beautiful, and I could sit for hours and look at them, but there's something very compelling about them, especially those eyes. There's some more cave paintings, rock paintings. These don't really show the eyes, but they sure do look like they've got helmets on. So once again, we've got these images that have been with us for thousands and thousands of years. Here are the eyes again. So there's a great deal of evidence that UFOs exist, aliens exist. I mean, here in Roswell, I don't think I really have to make the case that much for the existence of aliens and UFOs. That's not the purpose of what I'm going to talk about. I believe they're here. I think if anybody chooses to look at the evidence, you will come to the conclusion that, yeah, they're real, they're here. I think our government has done the same thing. They did this a long time ago. They looked at the evidence and they said, yes, they're here. And yes, we have to deal with them. What they also decided was, we don't want to deal with this with the public. This is a public relations nightmare. So what can we do to keep this down so we don't have to deal with it? And what they did was they came up with an educational program that would keep this down and keep us from asking too many questions, from taking it too seriously, or at least give them an out. If we do ask questions, they get to say, oh, that's nothing. You didn't actually see that alien or that UFO. You think you did because you saw it in a movie. How this all came about, I believe, is that in 1947, there were several events that really brought things up to a head. A pilot named Kenneth Arnold was flying his plane and he saw objects around him in flight. He was understandably upset. He made a big case about it. He publicized this, talked about it a lot. The very following month, in July, something crashed near Roswell, New Mexico, which many people still today, and I'm one of them, believe was not from this earth. Again, it was a public relations nightmare from the government's point of view. In September of that same year, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, was formed as its own entity. There is evidence that one of the first things they did was to begin experimenting with hypnosis and with drugs to learn about how to control people's minds. A few years later, in 1952, things came to a head again with UFO sightings over Washington, D.C. Now, I didn't get into the whole Roswell cover-up in detail because many other speakers here are going to get into that in depth. You probably already have heard it, or you will hear that over this weekend. But they did manage to kind of put the lid on things for a while, until 1952, when there were sightings over the Capitol. And all of a sudden, it's coming up again. You know, personally, I think they never really did a good job at putting it down in the beginning. They got people to stop talking about it, but you can't get people to stop thinking about it. And so when there were sightings over the Capitol in '52, it all came up again. This time, the Central Intelligence Agency convened a panel called the Robertson Panel. They said, we need to know how much of a threat are these UFOs? Are they a threat to national security? What do we need to do about them? What the Robertson Panel determined was that UFOs are not a threat to national security. I'd like to know what they base that on. I mean, not that I disagree or agree, but what information did they have to determine that? They did say that public interest in the subject could be a problem. And in a way, I can see that. If the government said, yes, there are UFOs, yes, they're real, every time anybody saw a plane outside and was feeling a little nervous that night, they might be calling their local Air Force base and saying, oh my God, there's something out here. And their argument was, our communication systems are going to be overwhelmed by people who get nervous and they call us up saying there's a UFO out there and there isn't really. And we're going to have all these people going out to check on this and it's going to be nothing. And we can't do our jobs with people calling us out every 2 minutes for swamp gas or mogul weather balloon, apparently. No. So, okay, their official recommendation was we need to keep this down. We need to kind of, calm things down, make it less of a question. So this is an actual quote from the Robertson Panel report, which was issued in 1953, which was that their concept of a broad educational program to lessen interest in this question was that it should have two major aims, both training, letting people know, what is out there that you might be mistaking for a UFO, and debunking. Because even at this point, they're accepting that there are UFOs, there are some things that are real that people are going to be seeing. But they still didn't want to have to answer questions about them. So the debunking aim would result in reduction in public interest in flying saucers. This education could be accomplished by mass media, and they say it right here, such as television, motion pictures, and popular articles. Okay, so right there in 1953, in this report, they said flat out, we're going to start using TV and movies and media to control how the public views UFOs. What they didn't say straight out in the report, but which they actually used, another technique, is something we call inoculation, which is you put out a little bit of information, and then when something big comes along, either it seems less scary or you have a way of laughing it off or brushing it off. If a movie goes out and there are images of aliens in it, then later when somebody says, oh my gosh, I saw a UFO, I saw these little beings, they look like this, you can say, well, yeah, you know where you got that image? There was that movie on last week. Okay, so that's one example of how inoculation works, and they use that pretty intensively as well. We started in about 1965. Now, there's a bit of a gap between 1953 and 1965, and that has to do with the history of television, of this new invention called television. In 1953, there were color TVs, but not very many of them. And one network, NBC, was owned by RCA, which was the primary manufacturer of color televisions. ABC and CBS didn't want to put color programming out because they didn't want to be drumming up sales for their competitor. This dragged on and dragged on and dragged on until 1965 when NBC said, you know what, we're putting our entire fall lineup in color. At which point ABC and CBS said, all right, we will too. So, when I saw this 1965, I thought, well, what the heck happened for the last 10 years? That was it. It was all just marketing. So we get our first alien image in a children's show. And yeah, a lot of adults watch this too, but I watched this when I was a kid. We got our little green man here. And our first image, the first way aliens were presented to the public is, oh, they're nice. He's a nice little guy. He's funny. He's kind of silly. But you know what? He's helpful. An interesting thing about him is that only Fred could see him. Okay, he had this selective visibility. This is something that was discussed much later. It has been discussed by Bud Hopkins and Carol Rainey in a book that they wrote, which was published in 2004, and it was called Sight Unseen, in which they talked about the science of invisibility and also transgenic beings, which I'll touch on a little later. But the really neat thing about this is that there's information being put out in 1965 about a little alien who could decide who is going to see him and who isn't. I mean, where did anybody come up with that idea? But it was actually happening. This is really true, only nobody talked about it until 2004. When Sight Unseen came out, that caused a real stir, even among ufology researchers, because a lot of people had not really seen that before. And I had to mention, this is an odd coincidence, Betty and Barney Rubble, Betty and Barney Hill. But it can't be a reference to Betty and Barney Hill because the Hill case didn't, well, it happened in 1961, but the Flintstones actually started much earlier. Gazoo appeared in 1965, but the Flintstones had been on the air since well before 1961. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out because I just think it's funky, and because it might strike someone else, especially if you look at the dates that I put up here. I didn't mean to mislead anyone. Okay, 65 is Gazoo's appearance. This is one that about 1 million people emailed me to tell me about after I gave this presentation in Roswell last year. I had not heard of space ghosts last year when I talked about this. I got more emails, I got letters, I got people coming up to me saying, have you seen space ghost? Have you seen that thing with the big praying mantis in it? I'm like, no. One man told me he was watching cartoons with his grandchildren. They were flipping channels, so he didn't know what it was. But he saw a scene where a praying mantis was on a spaceship, and there were 2 human children sitting in front of him at a computer terminal, and he was teaching them something. Now, that's something that comes up in a lot of pretty in-depth abduction reports. I mean, once you get really into this and you start reading a lot of the books and a lot of the literature, you'll see things like that. But that's not something that the general public, who isn't really that interested in UFOs, would know about. So once again, there's what seems to be accurate information being put out. Now, if somebody has an abduction experience and they say, well, I saw this 6-foot-tall praying mantis thing, and they try to tell anybody, what's that other person going to say? Oh, you were watching Space Ghost last week, right? That was Zorak. Space Ghost, who is the one over on the left, for anybody like me who was not familiar with this, has these armbands. You see him wearing those red armbands? All of his powers come from that. It's pure technology. And once again, I'm thinking in 1966, how much of this technology did we have? He can fire lasers with those things. He can fly. He can generate a protective force field. I mean, okay, these are kids' cartoons, and you could argue, well, somebody made this up because it's really fun. But the point is, we actually have some of this stuff now. There are people working on these things. So once again, they're putting real stuff out there. But if anyone catches on and tries to talk about it, yeah, it was on that cartoon. That's where you got that. You had a dream because you were watching cartoons. You know? And I just had to mention, too, when I was doing the research, I saw that these were written by someone named Bill Hamilton. Now, some of you here will be familiar with the name Bill Hamilton. He's a UFO researcher. We did contact the researcher, Bill Hamilton, because, I mean, I looked into the dates, you know, when this was done, and I looked up his bio and said, well, what was he doing at that time? Well, he was living in California, and he could very well have been doing this. We asked him. He said, no, that wasn't me. And Bill Hamilton is a fairly popular name, so we did check into it. As far as I can tell, it's not him. Okay, everybody watched Scooby-Doo as a kid, right? Scooby-Doo was great. I loved Scooby-Doo because they had ghosts on there, and they had monsters, and they had aliens, and all this really cool stuff. Problem was, from my point of view as a kid, they were never real. I always found out at the end it was some guy in a costume. You know, who was trying to scare people away because there was buried treasure under the back barn or something. I don't know. Every episode ended with the monster, the really cool character, being literally unmasked, mask pulled off, and he was let off in handcuffs, and he always said the immortal line, I'd have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you kids. And then, darn it was such a good story until then. Scooby-Doo, like Space Ghost, was made by Hanna-Barbera, Hanna-Barbera was one of the production teams that made more alien-themed cartoons than any other at that time. They were linked with MGM, which also has been linked with films that work along with this Robertson Panel education program. And I just have to mention, if anybody wants to get more into this, into the film side of it, because I don't really discuss movies in this, but if you're interested in the movies, there is a fantastic book which another individual contacted me about, and in fact he was kind enough to lend me his copy of the book. It's called Hollywood versus the Aliens. And it's actually a historical study of what was going on in the government about the time the movie industry was getting started. And some of the movies that were made, some of the earliest movies that portrayed aliens and life on other planets. And he actually traced it back, and he found connections in the production companies to who was in the CIA at that time. Or people would be in the CIA and retire, yeah, right. And then they would get involved with these movie production companies. So MGM was one of those that had links to the CIA. Hanna-Barbera got started with MGM and then went off on their own. So there is strong evidence that they were involved in this CIA debunking program. We're getting into a couple of sitcoms. And you may have noticed I'm being very selective. There are a ton of these shows. Once you start looking, they're everywhere. I chose this one partly because of Bud Hopkins and Carol Rainey's book. Again, Sight Unseen. Remember I mentioned transgenic beings. Transgenic beings are alien-human hybrids who look just like humans. The second half of the book, Sight Unseen, is all about transgenic beings, and they describe cases where people have run up against them. They've actually encountered these beings and not known that there was anything odd about them except for their behavior. Little things like they'd be in a city office but not know what a telephone was. Okay, little things like that. And the really funny thing is that the people who encountered them often didn't realize that there was anything odd about that at first. They would notice that later if they were describing the encounter for some reason to someone else. And the other person would say, wait a minute, what? They didn't what? So yeah, they would seem like they looked human, they could sound human, they could act human, but as long as they had sort of a script to work from, and if anything changed from that script, they didn't know how to handle it. Mork and Mindy, if anybody remembers this, Mork actually appeared as an extra on Happy Days, of all places, which was set in the 1950s. He was going to abduct Richie Cunningham, but apparently the Fonz managed to save Richie. I'll have to pull up that episode sometime and watch it again. I don't remember that. They talked him into not abducting people anymore. So he had his thing to do, but he didn't realize that it was going to upset anybody, and he was open to negotiation. He just wanted to be here and learn about people when he realized that that upset us, because evidently they don't understand emotion. Remember, that was a big thing on Mork and Mindy. He wanted to learn about human emotions. Once he realized that it was bothering people, he said, oh, no, I won't do that anymore. That's okay. So, you know, they're presenting aliens again as they're really nice. They may not understand us completely. You know, they might do things that seem like they're mean, but they're not really. They don't mean it. There's been a lot of talk about the Greys seeming like they don't understand emotion. I mean, possibly others too. What I've heard is mostly discussion about the Greys. When people describe encounters with the Greys, they say they don't understand, I'm so scared, or I'm so angry, or whatever, and they seem completely expressionless. They seem so calm, like they don't care that they're upsetting me, like nothing matters to them. They're just here to do a job. Mork actually was like that. He didn't act like that. He acted like a human. But he said flat out in the show several times, and I do remember hearing this, that he was here to study human relationships and human emotions, because they didn't really have that on his planet. Anybody remember Alf? I actually never got into watching this one very much, but I had a friend who loved it. He was absolutely addicted to Alf. Alf is very different in appearance from the others, although he's still got those big black eyes. You know, that seems to be like the one recurrent thing. Okay, except Mork, because he looks human. He didn't have that. But among the ones that look alien, it's always the big eyes. That's like the thing you can use to pick them out. He was presented also as a sympathetic character. His planet was dying, so he came here either to find help or to escape. And then he crashed when he got here, so, you know, right off the bat, he's somebody who needs help. Well, humans love that. We love to be presented with somebody who needs help, because then we get to feel like a good guy. So he started right off as a sympathetic character, even though he really looks funny. He was short and hairy, and big teeth and a big nose, which was completely different from all the others. You know, the alien Greys are, okay, they're short, but they're bald and they're gray, and they didn't even have mouths, much less teeth. But what he does look like is aliens that were reported in South America, especially in the 1950s. There was a big wave of little, short, hairy aliens near UFOs. There were UFO sightings, and then people would see these little hairy creatures. And they sounded pretty scary. So here again, you've got this guy who is very similar to those little scary guys in South America, only he's not scary at all. He was kind of funny and cute and bumbling, and and really all he wanted to go was home. He just wanted to get back home. At the end of this, the final episode, they sent him, the military finally got hold of him. And they did send him to a secret base, which was similar to Area 51. I don't believe they actually said Area 51. This was right after Bob Lazar came out, like within a couple of months of Bob Lazar going public and talking about Area 51, about this secret base. I don't know if scripts are always written that quickly, but from what I've seen, from experience with other shows, you always hear about how long it takes in your production time. It usually takes like a year or something, or several months. This was like 2 or 3 months after Bob Lazar came out, they did this. Just going back to the Robertson panel recommendation again, not only did they talk about using TV and movies, they actually mentioned Disney as one that they were going to work with. There's a long history of ties between Walt Disney and the CIA. And there's our little alien, who doesn't even pretend he's not an alien. I mean, if you've ever seen Lilo and Stitch, Stitch, the little blue guy here with the big black eyes, is an alien experiment from a genetics lab on another planet who escaped and came here. The big guy in the back with the 4 eyes works in the genetic lab, and he was sent to come get him. So there again we have something that's making him a sympathetic character, okay? That makes us like Stitch, even though he's got those big scary black eyes. And he's actually got some pretty big scary teeth too. I mean, there are times, I don't know if anybody here has seen the show, but I watched it with my kids. And there are times when he tries to look scary, and he sure does. He's good at it. But he's little, and he's kind of cute, and people on the show, people don't know who he is or what he is. They think he's a puppy. They think he's a really ugly puppy, but he's cute. Oh, Teletubbies. They live in an underground base. Let's watch this one.
Teletubbies. Teletubbies.
Teletubbies, I almost don't know where to begin with them. When they first came out, kids loved them. That was a really funny thing. Little kids are like, these guys are great, I want to watch Teletubbies. I found out about them because my kids watched them all the time. And they're on public broadcasting. I'm thinking, okay, this is educational TV, right? This must be fine. There must be something educational about it. It was an education for me watching it, let's say that. They live in an underground base. They have all these, you see that thing standing up in the background? It's like a pinwheel. But if you're watching it, that starts to spin and they get signals. They actually get a signal through those little receiver antenna on their heads. And then it shows up on the screen on their bellies. That's why they're Teletubbies. So they get all their messages from that. They have the classic big round heads and big round eyes. We can't tell if they're bald because they look like they're wearing spacesuits, but the impression is the same as the gray aliens. When I saw these the first time, all I could think was, oh my gosh, if a little kid were to wake up in the middle of the night and see a bunch of grays clustering around his bed, the first thing he's going to think is, oh my gosh, they're Teletubbies. And you know what, if the Teletubbies came to a little kid in the middle of the night and said, come here, we're going to take you for a ride, he'd say, okay. I don't want anybody telling my kids in the middle of the night. Okay, we're going to go take a ride and have them say okay. Opinions are divided as to what exactly we can do about that, but one thing I can not do is have them watching TV programs during the day that are going to make them think that's all right. The Teletubbies, aside from having the big round heads, these guys wear clothing which the Greys and the other aliens don't always, but they look like spacesuits. I mean, they look similar to some of those cave paintings we were looking at earlier. As I mentioned, they do live in an underground base. I had a picture of inside the base, but I don't know if we're going to be able to show that. We'll have to see. But it's, when you look inside, you can see the structural supports of the room, and they're all curved. Everything is gray or blue or metallic, you know, and it's all, you can't see where the lighting is coming from. It's all sort of concealed. It's very, very rounded. Everything is rounded. Everything, the ceiling is curved, the walls go up, there are no corners. I don't know if anybody here was watching John Carpenter's presentation yesterday, but he talked about one of the common factors of abduction accounts when he asks people, when he's doing hypnotic regression with them, to describe what they see in the corners of the room, and they say, oh, I'm sorry, there don't seem to be any corners. Well, that's exactly what it looks like in Teletubbies. They describe the furniture. An abductee will describe the furniture. Say a table is having only one large support in the center instead of having 4 legs at the corners like we do. That's the same way the Teletubbies are. I've tried to get in touch with the woman, Ann Wood, who runs Ragdoll Productions, and she is the brains behind Teletubbies, and also another show that I'm hoping to show you in a minute. I did not get any answer back from her, but I wanted to know whether she's at all familiar with the UFO literature or abduction research, and whether she intended to put these images in, or whether she knew what those images looked like when she put them in. Maybe it was completely accidental, I don't know, but as I said, I never got any answer back from her. I love Invader Zim. He is so cool. This is a classic. Okay, he doesn't pretend he's not an alien. He is an alien. He wants to come here to Earth, and he wants to conquer all of Earth for the glory of his home planet. The problem is he's like this big, and he's really, really, really incompetent. Okay, but he thinks he's amazing. He thinks he's brilliant. He thinks he's strong. He thinks anything he does is going to be just the best plan in the world, only week after week after week, it's not. I really wanted to put him in because of the big glowing red eyes. Okay, that's different from the big black eyes. But I recently had the pleasure of reading Daryl Sims' book, UFO Hunter, and he described someone who saw an alien, and I'm sorry, I can't recall whether it was Daryl himself or if he was describing someone else seeing this. But he described someone who saw an alien come into their bedroom at night in the dark and described it having big black eyes, but it looked like there was red light leaking out around the edges, as if this alien were wearing something dark to cover their glowing red eyes. Now, when I heard about that, all I could think was, oh my gosh, I have to put Invader Zim in my talk now. Another thing that I found personally interesting was that we were watching this in 2001. 9/11 was on a Tuesday. At that time, Invader Zim was showing on Friday. That following Friday, we sat down to watch Invader Zim, and it wasn't on. And nobody mentioned it. And I looked at the TV listings. It was supposed to be on, you know, but they pulled it because apparently that was a little too upsetting, you know, having an invader come from outside to come here and want to conquer us. They said, well, that's too much. We're not going there. The little thing behind Zim, by the way, with the green eyes, that's his robot. The robot is just as incompetent as he is. I think they fished it out of the garbage before they gave it to him. But now here's Zim in his costume. When he's pretending to be human, he has to go to school because he's so short, he looks like a child, so he goes to school. And there he is with one of his classmates who kind of thinks there might be something odd about him. He wears a wig to cover up his antenna. He has insect-like antenna. And he wears contact lenses to cover up his glowing red eyes. This kid next to him is the one character on the show who suspects that there's anything wrong with Zim. And Dib, this other boy, is shown as being a lunatic. Everybody else thinks he's crazy. They think he picks on Zim because Dib says, oh, he's got green skin, people. Does anybody notice the green skin? Zim said, it's a skin condition. And everybody said, Dib, quit picking on the new kid. He's got a skin condition. And you know what? When you think about it, isn't that how society reacts? I mean, we'll grasp at anything to say, that's not a UFO, that's not an alien. That's swamp gas, right? That's the planet Venus. That's, I don't know. That sighting at Chicago O'Hare, that was clouds. Yeah, pilots don't know what clouds look like. That was clouds. My 9-year-old wasn't fooled by that one, by the way. She said, what? Pilots don't what? Okay, so we're back to Teletubbies again. Here you can kind of see they're inside this house that they live in. Before we saw the outside where it looked like just a little hill. It was completely concealed. Here you can see the supports at the ceiling and how they're all curved and metallic. And this thing that they're all clustered around looks like a vacuum cleaner, but it's this little intelligent machine. It's like a drone sort of thing that goes around and cleans up after them. Man, I wish I had one of those. Every time they make a mess, they say, uh-oh, and it comes bustling along and cleans up. Okay, here we go. Teletubbies have their big round heads, their big round eyes. They're wearing spacesuits. They live in an underground facility. Okay, does any of this sound familiar to anything else that you've heard here this weekend? They have this intelligent machine, the Nunu. That thing that sticked up, good heavens, I've been hanging around with kids too much. Sticks up in the background that I pointed out. It was like a pinwheel at the top. Well, that starts spinning, and it gives them instruction, but sometimes it also tells them what to do. And there's another thing in one of these pictures. Nope. Okay, there's something else that comes up. It's like a speaker on a pole. And they'll also get instruction from that. A voice comes out of it and says, you know, do this, it's time to do that, whatever, and they do it. Okay, once again, you can see the inside, and there's, over behind the red one there, whose name is Poe. See, I know all their names. There are buttons and lights and things, and they use these to do things, to control things, but they're always very random. I mean, they seem to know what they're doing, but if you're watching it, you can't get any kind of handle on where's the light switch and where's the switch for... There doesn't seem to be a switch to bring that little machine out. They just say, uh-oh, and it comes. This thing that pokes up, it just does that at random. They have no control over that. It just does. And then it tells them it's time to play this game, or time to play that, or time to go outside, or it's time to eat, time to go to sleep, and they just do whatever it says. These are the really cool ones, and I have a video clip, but I'm not sure if we'll be able to run it. When the show begins, the first thing you see is this beautiful little park. It's like you're up high, kind of looking down on a park. And up in the sky, there's this metallic silver ball that comes flying across the sky. And it moves very erratically. It'll move kind of back and forth, and it trails a rainbow behind it. Now, the first time I thought it, I saw this, I thought, oh, look, a UFO. But my kids are watching it, and I thought, well, okay, I'll wait and see where this goes. And it sails over groups of kids on the ground. It goes all over the world. I mean, they're very clear about this is in America, this is in England, this is in India. You know, it'll go over, and everywhere it goes, there are groups of kids outside looking up at it, saying, boo-bah, boo-bah. And then finally, the camera angle changes, and now you're inside the ball, and you can see what's in there. And it was those 5 beings, which I'm going to go back to. It's these guys. But instead of floating around like that, they're all tucked into their little beds, which are like pods. They look like milkweed pods. And they're fastened to the inside of this sphere. And all you can see is they're just the top of their heads poking out because their eyes are closed. They're all asleep. And then the voiceover says their names, and one by one their eyes pop open. And their eyes, when they pop open, they're huge. They are giant and black and glittering. And it happens so suddenly. It really is powerful. And it scares me that little kids are seeing this because they don't know what it looks like. They don't know what it resembles. And what I found is that a lot of people who are studying ufology, who are interested in UFOs, don't have little kids at home, so they don't know that this stuff is going out there. Rich and I appear to be part of a very, very small group that combines studying UFOs with having small children. I mean, we're raising a family. There are very few other people who do this at the same time, I think. So the boobas, as compared to the Teletubbies, they're a little less human looking than the Teletubbies are. Their heads are bigger, they're more round, they don't have those antennae coming up off them. Their eyes are larger and darker. The mouth and jaw now are completely hidden, which to me says they're moving even closer to the image of the gray, which has this very tiny, just little slits for nose and slit for mouth. The first time you see them, they're asleep, but then their eyes go. And it's really chilling when you watch it. I hate these things. I'm sorry. Personal opinion. Now I'm going to get sued by whatever company sells them, Mattel probably, I don't know. I really, really don't like them, and I think for me it's like, because their faces are distorted a little bit, like the way clown faces are. You know how kids hate clowns? Because they have human faces, but they're not quite. You know there's something wrong about them, but you can't quite put your finger on it? Okay, these things really, really irritate me. But I never would have thought to include them in this talk until I was watching one of Paula Harris's presentations. And she very kindly allowed me to use a photo of hers, which actually she got from Jaime Maussan, and he got it from a contactee who was allowed to take photos of the beings that he contacted. From what I understand, and I believe I'm understanding this correctly, it's a very complicated kind of story, but these beings are light beings, and they're sometimes referred to as hybrids. There's a picture of one of them, and there's a picture of these Bratz dolls, these toys, and I'm thinking they look like almost the same face, or they look like they could be the same species. So this is what we're giving our kids to play with. This is what, our kids are watching these things on TV, and they don't even know that these things look like aliens. And then we're giving them toys that we don't even realize, a lot of us, look like these alien beings. So, okay, what's the problem with this then? So they're cartoons, big deal, Kids watch cartoons. We have talking animals in cartoons. We have Bugs Bunny. What is the big deal? Why would anyone be going to so much trouble to do this? I mean, we know that the government did create this education program. They talked about it in the Robertson panel. To anyone who's interested in doing a little digging, to anyone who's interested in the entertainment industry beyond what did Britney do this week and, what's Lindsay Lohan in jail for now? And it's hard to get past that because the media wants us to think about Britney and Lindsay and Brad and Angelina. They don't want you to get past that. But if you're interested and you do any digging, it's right there. You can see all the connections between the same people who are with the CIA and now they're working with the movie production companies. Now, why would they do that? I can understand CIA people being hooked in with, Boeing and Lockheed and all of this. But MGM and Disney? One thing I don't believe about the CIA is that they would spend their time and effort doing something that isn't going to benefit them. Okay, so if they're doing these things, they've got a reason. And it's going to be good for them and not necessarily for us. That's my basic premise. So if they're doing this at all, what could their purpose be? They want to change something. What are they changing? They're changing the way we see UFOs. They're changing the way we perceive them. They're changing the way we react to them. They're changing the way people who have not seen UFOs react to people who have. It's really easy to ridicule someone who comes and says, oh my God, I've had this traumatic experience. I saw a UFO. I was taken on board a ship. All these things happened. Oh my God, it was really terrifying. Well, you can say, yeah, but there was that movie on TV last week. You must have seen it. That must be where you got it. And even if the person says, what movie? I didn't see anything about it. You can say, oh, well, it was, it was advertised. You must have seen a commercial for it or something. People were talking about it at work, I guess. You must have heard about it. It's been out there. When Whitley Strieber's book Communion came out, that was sort of a mixed blessing. I mean, on the one hand, a lot of people who believed they had seen aliens who looked like that suddenly thought, oh my God, that's what I saw. It brought up memories, which is a mixed blessing in itself, but it made them aware that something had happened. It made them aware that it had happened to other people, not only themselves. It made them aware of someone they could talk to. Whitley gets mail all the time from people who've seen things and they don't know who else to go to. It makes people realize maybe they're not crazy. They've had these things that have been in their heads. They've been remembering these things. Oh my God. Now they're thinking it was real. It was real. It might be terrifying and it might be terrible, but at least I'm not crazy. And now I have someone I can go to. The flip side of that is now the debunkers had a perfect example. They had something to hang over people to say, well, you just think you saw that because it's been everywhere. It's on the New York Times bestseller list. It's been in every bookstore. It's been on TV. That image is all over the place. You have to do some digging and some research to find that that image actually wasn't all over the place as early as a lot of people were talking about it. People were mentioning that. People were describing it and drawing pictures of their nightmares with that face long before Whitley Strieber's book ever came out. But this education program is working. And I don't want that to sound like I'm thinking Whitley Strieber is part of the education program. That's just an example of how these things happen. It's important that the images get out in a way, because it is important that people who have these experiences should have some kind of reassurance that they're not going crazy. Because these things are really happening. And, you know, as much as we may not want to face it because it can be scary, a lot of people think it's not scary. They think it's wonderful. They think it's contact with the Space Brothers. They're here to help us. They're here to tell us that we have to clean up our planet. They came all this way to tell us that? And like we didn't know? You know, another problem that I have with this idea that they come all this way and go to all this trouble to sneak into our bedrooms at night and steal us, take us up into their ships to tell us that we have to clean up our environment. If it was that important and they've been doing it this long, and we haven't done it, I mean, obviously it's not working. If it was important enough for them to go to that much trouble to come here, would they not have maybe stepped in and done something about it themselves? And if it doesn't matter that much, then why come here in the first place? And if it does matter so much that they have to come here, why do they have to take us out of our beds at night? And why do they have to freeze the rest of our families so that, you know, only they take the one person they want, and everybody else is like asleep and unable to wake up or to respond or to do anything? Or another time, sometimes people will have shared experiences. Maybe a husband and wife will be taken together, but the next day the husband might want to talk about it and try to figure out what happened, and maybe the wife doesn't want to mention it, doesn't want to think about it, doesn't want to act as if anything happened at all. Okay, admittedly, I will be the first to admit that I am not as smart as they may be. They got here. I don't know how to go to another planet or another dimension. Fair enough. But it doesn't seem to me, logically, that they have a good reason for doing what they're doing. And in that light, that is why it makes me uncomfortable to see these images presented to children as if these are cute, these are funny, these are fine. If somebody like this shows up and they want to take you for a ride, yeah, go. They're cute. Alf, he's funny. He's a good guy. He's been through some tough times. You know, if he wants you to go do something with him, go do it. It's okay. Teletubbies, they're cute. You know, you can go play with the Nunu. Maybe the little voice will come and tell you what to do. Actually, I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad thing for kids to learn to do what they're told once. No. No. I'm sure you heard in that very kind introduction that Peter gave me that my husband and I homeschool our kids. And one of the things that we really, really try to teach above all else is to be a critical thinker. To think for yourselves, and when someone says something, you know, evaluate it. And I tell my kids always, when someone tells you anything, especially if they tell you to do something, always think about where that's coming from, who's saying it, what reasons might they have to say that? Why would they want you to do what they're telling you to do? Okay? Why would the government want us to look at UFOs and aliens as if it's nothing? If they really are nothing to worry about, if aliens really are just cute and cuddly and they're here to help us clean up our environment, then why do they always seem to find somebody who will say, oh, that O'Hare sighting, that was a cloud? Oh, that glowing orange ball that followed police officers across 5 counties in the Midwest, that was the planet Venus. And I'm not kidding. I mean, there was a case like that, and that was the official explanations. They found some professional astronomer who was willing to say, yeah, the planet Venus looks like that sometimes when it's right at sunset and it's just above the horizon. And the police officers were saying it appears to chase us down the street and across 3 counties. Okay. That was another one that didn't get past my daughter. She was 7 at that time. I mean, if you can't fool a 7-year-old girl, why even bother, you know? So yeah, we need to think about why is anyone trying to make our children more trusting and more accepting of something that the government won't even admit exists? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I don't pretend to have a lot of answers. What I'm hoping to do is to make people aware of this and to show you that there is a real cause for concern. And to stress the importance of evaluating for ourselves what we see on TV, and also of watching what our kids are watching and evaluating what they are looking at and talking to them about it. We need to know what is going into our kids' heads, and we need to make sure that what they're seeing and what they're thinking about what they're seeing is not just being handed to them by someone that we may or may not trust. It's exactly the same as having a total stranger pull up in their car and say, "Here, kiddo, I'll give you a ride home from school, don't worry about it." You know, would anybody in this room do that? I'm hoping you're all thinking no. I'm hoping you're all just stunned that I even brought that up. Okay. Well, letting our kids just watch TV and movies and not knowing what's being said to them and not thinking about what kind of messages they're getting is the same thing. We need to at least ask the kids after they watch a show like this, well, what do you think? You know, what do you think about that? I'm not advocating telling them all of the abduction literature, the abduction research. I think that's too scary for kids. Different people have ideas about what may be the truth about the abduction experiences. As I mentioned, some people think they're space brothers, they're here to help us, they're here to save us. Other people think they have less benevolent intentions. I'm not going to make a judgment on that right now because personally I think there's more than one group, and I think some are benevolent and some are not. So that's not the issue here. The issue is, how will our children be able to judge that for themselves when the time comes? If they're being raised watching as much TV as American children do these days, and we're doing our part to try to stop that. We don't have cable anymore, which made it really fun trying to do the research for this, because people kept saying, "Oh, have you seen this? Have you seen this?" I'm like, no, because we don't watch TV. And then I felt like a fraud because I'm talking about these things, I hadn't seen them. So I had to track them down on DVD. At any rate, we need to make sure that our kids have the tools that they need to evaluate what they're seeing and to know when something is entertainment and should just be enjoyed and then forgotten, and when there are actual lessons to be learned from these things. Sometimes the lesson to be learned is, who made this? And what's the message? What are they trying to make me believe? And is that someone I should pay attention to, or is that someone with their own agenda? Okay, that's a really valuable lesson that I think a lot of us adults don't often pay enough attention to for ourselves. And it's hard because sometimes the shows are really, really good. And you kind of, you forget to ask. But if we can teach our kids to be critical thinkers, to evaluate what they're seeing, what they're being told, what the source is, I think that more than anything else will maybe not keep them safe through their lives, because I don't think anything can do that. But it will make them stronger. It will put them in a better position to protect themselves when that comes up. Personally, also, I think we're living through some very scary times, and a lot of what's going on that I find kind of scary is linked to the government and what's happening there right now. on principle, I don't like trusting everything the government hands us. So teaching the children to evaluate the source and think about the fact that the person who's telling you something may not have your best interest at heart, I think is a valuable thing to be spending our time on. As parents, we need to pay close attention, and we need to make our own decisions about what our kids watch, about what they think about what we watch, what they watch. And this doesn't mean we don't want to become the totalitarians now. Okay, I had a long talk with my son not that long ago about peer pressure and questioning people. I said, I want you to question authority. I want you always, when someone tells you to do something, think about it. It's the same thing I've been talking about for the last 10 minutes. I said, there are certain people you know you can trust to have your best interest at heart. If someone else tells you to do something, just consider it, okay? Think about it before you do it. And I did this big, long tirade, I mean, even longer than I've been going at you guys about this. And I went on and repeating myself and going over and over to make sure it really was getting in, because he's a kid, you know, and I want to make sure he understood. And I said, so remember, always question authority. And the first thing he said is, why should I? Thank you. I thought that was brilliant of him. I was so proud of him. I said, that's perfect. That's what I wanted. I believe I'm done. Thanks so much for listening today, everybody. Hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend.